He's going to lead our discussion with a keynote speech on augmented humanity, what it means, what we need to think about. Jamie Metzl, please.
Thank you, Richard. And you're perfect, don't change a thing. So how many of you, when you see this title, Augmented Human, how many of you think, well, that seems kind of scary. I know what a human is, and an augmented human, that seems kind of sci-fi, kind of cyborg. Just raise your hand if there's something that feels a little scary about augmented human. And it does, because we've seen all these films of these people who are part person, part cyborg. It's in a lot of the Star Trek, and it scares us. But you know who are augmented humans? All of you. Maybe there are some people in this audience who have pacemakers. That means you're a cyborg. Maybe there are people who have cochlear implants, also a cyborg. Maybe some of you have this ultimate superpower, augmented human superpower that our ancestors didn't have because you were immunized, and that's why people aren't being wiped out. Maybe you're wearing glasses. So the question for us is not augmented or not augmented. We are augmented. That's why we are here. The question is how and what are the limits? Because we have always co-evolved with our technology. The reason why the population of this country and the world is so high is because of agriculture. When we were hunter-gatherers, we couldn't live with this kind of population density. And when we think of evolution, we think of it as kind of fixed in a way. And yet we should know that from our history, evolution is the most variable thing of all. In 3.8 billion years, we went from being single-cell organisms to being us. And this was never the end point of our evolutionary journey. We've only been Homo sapiens for about 300,000 years, and we are fast on our way to something else, and something big, and something profound. And now is the moment when that is happening. And a lot of people, when I talk about this, say, well, geez, that scares me. And it should. It should excite you, and it should scare you. And they say that doesn't feel natural. And then the question is, well, what does feel natural? There's nothing natural about agriculture, or about healthcare, or about cities, or about pretty much anything we do. So the question isn't natural versus non-natural. We are living non-natural lives according to how our ancestors lived. But the reason this moment is so big and so essential, and why it's so important that we're all meeting together now, is we are at this takeoff point for our species. We are more educated, more connected than ever before. So what does that mean? Different parts of the world, we're in a part of the world that developed agriculture first. But there were other parts of the world, in Asia and China, it was a 2,000-year gap from when agriculture began here to when agriculture began there. Now, if you invent something, whatever it is, the equivalent of the plow, of agriculture, it's an email, it's a post away from everyone on Earth. So there you go, you just made if you're in this other place, you just got a 2,000-year jump. You are ahead, and that's with everything, with every aspect of knowledge, with more and more humans who are part of this process. And then we talk about different technology. We talked about IT and AI this morning. But the reason we're at a takeoff point is we're seeing a super convergence of all of these technologies that are leaning against each other. And because we are experiencing this exponential change, and as we're seeing with Moore's Law, but it's across a lot of technologies of speeding up change, what it means is that our sense of time looking in the rearview mirror is too slow because we are on a J-curve of change. And so if you are thinking, well, I know what a 10-year unit of change is because I remember what the world was like in 2009, that is not a 10-year unit of change. Let's call that a 6-year unit of change. And then that 6-year unit of change becomes a 3-year unit of change. You get that. So we are moving, we are barreling forward. And what that is doing is creating a world where the worlds of science and the worlds of science fiction are connected. I write both nonfiction and science fiction, and really the only difference is characters and a few sex scenes, because we are now at a time, that was a joke by the way, you can laugh. We are now at a time where the limits on our productive capacity are in many ways just the limits of our individual and collective imagination. And that is a really, really big deal. And what is that going to open up? We're going to talk about some of these technologies. We're doing a panel on Wednesday on genetic engineering. And we're going to fundamentally change the way that we do healthcare, moving from generalized to precision to predictive healthcare. The way we make babies, moving from, and I'll talk about this on Wednesday, conception through sex to conception through science. The nature of the babies, the nature of the babies that we make. We're going to use technology to live longer. We are going to bring technologies into ourselves. Right now, everyone is carrying around these phones. All of those technologies are coming into us, and everything is going to come together. I don't want to go through all of the details because you know it, and in many ways, the issue isn't just the details of the different technologies or even all of the technologies. The issue is where it's going. And there are many people who think, well, I kind of have a model for how to think about these technologies, which is therapeutic applications, curing diseases. That stuff is the good stuff. Kind of helping people get to the level of normal, what we see as normal, that's the good stuff. But going beyond normal, that's the bad stuff. That's the enhancement. But there's really no possible way to divide the normal and the enhanced, because all of life is on a spectrum. And it's not just the spectrum of what is possible for a human. I mean, we have our lowest IQ and our highest IQ. But we are already enhancing ourselves. Right now, there are some people who are born with bad eyesight. In the old days, those people would have had, in many cases, a hard time surviving. And now we have glasses. And then we have telescopes and microscopes. And now we can see into cells and we can see out into the stars. If someone had to say, well, what is normal for vision? How could you answer that question? You can't answer it about health. You can't answer it about age. You really can't answer it about anything. And so the question is not, should we or should we not play God? We, our species, into quoting Stuart Brand, we are already as gods. We are already as gods, and the question is, can we get good at it in time? And that is really what we need to be thinking about, because the pressures are going to push us forward. We talked this morning about these technologies being decentralized and dispersed around the world, which is great. It's why we can be here in Armenia talking about revolutionary technologies, and this is as good of a place as any. We also talked about cultural differences. Different societies have different ways of thinking about technology and their use, and we see that across the board. And then these societies and communities with different values and systems and norms are competing with each other, whether it's this AI race between the United States and China that is in many ways going to define economics for the 21st century, whether it's issues of how to use autonomous killer robots, which are, again, human augmentations. And if you're a defense minister of a country, if you do use autonomous killer robots, you're potentially putting human life on Earth at risk. But if you don't use it and your adversary does, you're putting your country at risk. How are we going to think about these things? And this then leads us into the issue of principles. And we talked this morning all about principles. In many ways, the issues are the same here. What are the ethical systems that we want to guide our decision making? Because all of these technologies are value neutral. They don't come with their own values built in. Their values are our values. And how do we make sure that we can use these technologies that enhance inclusiveness, that enhance our cohesiveness as communities and as a species, that don't undermine
our essential diversity, which is the core survival strategy of our species. And then how do we think about building the kinds of norms, having empowered conversations of people who are educated about these topics. We bring into dialogues and engage and listen to each other, and then build norms that can lead to regulations and laws and international laws. And it's all the more difficult because there's this mismatch of this science that is racing forward exponentially and these regulatory infrastructures that are only inching forward glacially. But because now is the time when these technologies are all coming to fruition, we all must be, as Dick Clark said this morning, we all must be part of the process of shaping these technologies, and rather than having other people shape how these technologies impact our lives. And we have to see the incredible positive story, because every time some little kid dies of some terrible genetic disease, or a 100-year-old person gets Alzheimer's or dementia, that is a crime against potential. And so we have to embrace, we'd be insane not to embrace these technologies that are going to do so much good for us. And we would also be insane to not recognize that there are real risks that we have to be mindful of, and we have to begin addressing together and now. Because the question for all of us, it's not enhancement, yes or no. It's not augmented human, yes or no. The answer is yes. The real question for us is how best do we embrace these technologies in ways that can optimize their benefits and minimize their harms. So let me stop there and hand it back over to Richard.
Right.